a bit like a tourist advert. But I think what picked me up was that the athletes who made it on the boats, they looked like they were having a really good time, which was amazing considering how wet it was. But I think once we got onto the more formal bits, and I mean, the lighting of the torch was stunning. And I went to look at it last night and, you know, just thousands of people around, you know, it being in sort of the heart of the city. These games feel like they're much closer to real people rather than the people who can just afford to buy the tickets. And the reality is some of the tickets are very expensive.
Yeah, I think that they obviously did take quite a big risk. And I mean, some of it was utterly bonkers, you know, Assassin's Creed meets Marie Antoinette. But I love that silver horse. And, you know, I didn't think I was a Celine Dion fan, but I am this morning.
I mean, I think she absolutely nailed it. I haven't met anyone who didn't think she was absolutely stunning and sort of, you know, underneath the Eiffel Tower. I mean, I think for me as a Paralympian, what was incredible was that they used a mixture of Olympians and Paralympians to carry the torch. No other city has done that. They've used it into the run-up, but not actually on the night of the opening ceremony. And I think that's a really big nod to the Paralympics, which come in a few weeks' time. And around the city, there's lots of imagery of Paralympians as well, which is quite exciting to see. It's not just the Olympics and then we have the Paralympics. It feels like they've given some extra thought to how they can build up the Paralympic Games.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, the French are boasting, rightly, about the fact that apparently there are equal numbers of male and female athletes in the first 2 weeks in the Olympics. There was a time when the Paralympics were a sort of afterthought. That's no longer true, but how far along are we to the road to parity for the Paralympics?
I think each Games takes another step forward. I mean, certainly London raised the bar, and I think part of that is that, you know, athletes were absolutely at the heart of all the decision-making, and when you've got chair like Seb Coe, who'd been to so many games and understood the Paralympic movement, you know, things like the village, you know, was, you know, there was complete parity there. So I think it's a shame for Tokyo, you know, with lockdown, that we didn't get to see the best of what they could do. But now, any city that bids for the Olympics, they have to have the Paralympics. So each cycle, it feels like we're moving on. And this time, there's going to be more coverage of the Paralympics around the world than ever before. The USA are, you know, doing a lot more coverage. And I think I've always said that, you know, when USA starts taking the Paralympics seriously, then that just gets it into a whole, you know, number of different markets. Because the reality is we have to have people watching.
What in practice does it mean, Tanni, for the athletes to move towards Paralympic parity? I mean, is it just a sort of an issue of the image, or are there practical outputs for the athletes?
I mean, there's very practical outputs. You know, part of it is recognition. You know, Paralympians are elite athletes. They train incredibly hard. You know, anyone who's Olympian and Paralympian, elite sports person, they train incredibly hard. Recognition of success is nice. But the reality is also is about sponsorship. It's about that financial backing. You know, in athletics, over the years, you know you've made it as a mainstream runner if you've got $1 million a year shoe contract. Paralympians are nowhere near that. So there is a financial part of it as well. It's not all of it, but I think it's kind of interesting as well, the way that Paralympians can have an impact. The Paralympics is first and foremost an elite sporting event, but it can nudge kind of that social attitude towards discipline. It can't fix it all, absolutely not, but it can start a different conversation.
Do you think that, in a sense that, sorry, I wanted to come back to a separate point, but I'll come back to that in a second. Can I ask you about the issue of the cleanness, if I can use that expression, of these Olympics and Paralympics? Are we making progress in stamping out cheating?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, there's a lot of controversy coming into these games about the Chinese swimmers, America, Olympic and Paralympic Federation have taken a stance. There's lots of politics behind the scenes. You know, there are similar issues in Paralympic sport. There will always be individuals who will try and push the boundaries. But I think it's it's really important that, you know, as you say, that cleanliness of the games for both games is kept, and you know, the investment into things in Paralympic sport, intentional misrepresentation, in Olympic sport, it's more likely to be around drugs. That they have to keep investing in that to keep people watching, because I think that's a really important part of it. So I think every games there's been those debates. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out with, you know, the IOC sort of making some sort of very big statements about the USA and where they are at the moment. I don't think the LA Games are in any doubt whatsoever. There's no way they'd take the LA Games away from the USA, but it's a perpetual discussion that I think we need to keep addressing.
You've seen a lot of these games, and you know, you're a public figure, you're in the House of Lords and all of that, so you probably a person best qualified to answer this question. We had the Lionesses, and everybody was cheerful about that. Mild disappointment about the Euros. I'm going to ask you in a moment what success here is going to look like, but if we are successful, how much do these things affect the wider public mood? You know, everybody's a bit gloomy here. Do you think success in Paris can help lift Britain?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, you know, at games time, you know, over the years we talked about the Wimbledon effect, where, you know, a couple of weeks after Wimbledon, it seems like everybody wants to play tennis. And we do get that spike in participation. It's how you put the funding and the support behind it to make sure that we keep developing. We need people to be physically active. We're a nation that we say we love sport. We actually quite like watching sport. You know, 80% of women aren't fit enough to be healthy. So, you know, we have to do more. And there is part of it, you know, with the games. They do provide these inspirational moments. But, you know, to then go away from watching the games to actually being an athlete takes quite a lot of hard work, determination, resilience, you know, and a bit of luck. So, yeah, there's definitely a spike. It will lift the mood in the nation. And you say about success, I think there's two different sorts of success. There's the medal success. You know, Team GB is off to a brilliant start. Wasn't particularly expecting to win a medal in the diving. You know, the big sports, athletics, swimming, you know, have to deliver. So there's the number of medals, gold medals, you know, silvers and bronzes only count when there's a tie for gold, so the gold medals matter. But I think the public relate to, you know, inspirational moments, a sport they haven't really watched before, someone was considered an underdog who comes out and does this amazing performance. So I think to the public, success is in two parts. And, you know, there will be moments that, you know, someone years from now will say that was the thing that got me on the path to being an Olympian or Paralympian.
Okay, I like your distinction between doing and watching. My sofa is very much in training at the moment. But just very quickly, one sport that we should maybe watch that we wouldn't otherwise, and one person to watch. Oh,
skateboarding is amazing. I think that's going to have moved on so much in the last 4 years. I always hate. I'm going to say Tom Dean, swimmer. Mostly his mum had an absolute nightmare getting to Paris. There were just so many people trying to get her on a train yesterday, and Eurostar stepped in. And so I hope for his mum that he has the most amazing games, because it's been so hard for her to get here.
Tanni, thank you so much for your time this morning, and travel back safely.
Thank you.
Up next, are we seeing an escalation towards a wider Middle East conflict? I'll ask the chair of the Israeli Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee, Yuli Edelstein. With Israel's war against Hamas now in its 10th month, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists it won't end without what he calls total victory. But the reality is that Palestinian deaths are mounting. A humanitarian crisis is spiraling. Hostages are still held captive. And there's the ever-present threat of war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yuli Edelstein is a politician with Netanyahu's Likud party and is chair of the Israeli Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Good morning, Mr. Edelstein.
Good morning, Trevor.
Can we just start with what we know? What do we know for certain about the source of the attack on the Golan Heights yesterday?
We know that it was a Falcon 1 rocket produced in Iran, fired by Hezbollah. It murdered 12 children from the Druze community. They were playing football at that time on their local stadium, and there are dozens of others still injured in Israeli hospitals.
How do you respond to Iran's accusation that this is in some way Israel's responsibility and that evidence of Israeli aggression?
Well, I don't even think I have to clarify that these cowardly acts of Iranian proxies, in this case Hezbollah, and the atrocities in the south executed by Hamas, are part of the general plan of Iran that, in their view, leads to the annihilation of this so-called Zionist entity. They can't even pronounce the words "the State of Israel." They have plans of their own, but we have different plans for our future here. It's terrible to mourn 12 young children, but it's at the same time leads us to the obvious conclusion: we can't live here peacefully, develop our country, strike new peace accords with our neighbors here in the area, as long as we will be threatened by Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south, and by Iranians running this whole show. We will have to react, not to react in terms of revenge, but to react in terms of getting rid of that danger and bringing back dozens of thousands of Israeli citizens who right now can't be in their homes on our northern border and had to be evacuated to the center of the country.
Mr. Edelstein, I think everybody will sympathise with the shock, but is it right, or is it the wisest course for the Israeli Prime Minister essentially to start by promising retaliation? Is this not a moment when perhaps efforts should be devoted to lowering the temperature rather than raising it?
Well, it's always good to lower the temperature as long as we know that the danger disappears. If it's about a make-believe game, the type that some of us were trying to play in the South, saying that Hamas has been deterred, they're much more involved in building life in Gaza, they kind of neglected their idea of attacking Israel. Well, unfortunately, we learned the hard way what the ultimate result of that approach was. So I don't think that what Prime Minister or any other high-ranking Israeli official means is that we have with, crazy look in our eyes to start thinking about how we bring revenge, retaliate immediately towards Hezbollah. It should be part of the general effort, as I've said, to get rid of Hezbollah on our border, to get them as far away as possible, or even better, destroy them as a terror organization in order to live peacefully in any part of the state of Israel, which, I repeat, is not the case right now. People neither in the south of the country nor in the north of the country can't live peacefully because of the kind of attacks that we witnessed yesterday.
So we would not expect to see what some people would describe as punishment, a punishment response from Israel, but essentially a defensive one.
Trevor, there is no way to punish someone for deaths of 12 innocent children. I don't know what kind of punishment we can talk about. The only way to react is, as I've said, to continue destroying the infrastructure of this dangerous terror organization called Hezbollah, and to bring safety and calm and peace to our residents in the north of Israel.
All right. Well, perhaps we ought to talk about how you deal with terrorist organizations. This morning we are hearing that there have been deaths of 30 more people in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Force has said that its action was directed at a Hamas command center. That may or may not be the case, but children have died in that attack. You can understand why from the outside, whatever the intention might be, the outcome has been the punishment of innocents.
Hamas, unfortunately, proved in all possible ways that it gave a new meaning to the word human shield. It's not only protecting itself with civilians, it's interested in the death of civilians in order for normal people all around the world to say, this is something we can't take anymore. Israel has to stop, bring ceasefire, and so on and so forth. This is their, not tactics, this is their strategy to push as many civilians as possible into the line of fire. Israel is not giving them that pleasure. That's why if we look at facts and figures of what's been happening in the urban warfare in Gaza, including all these tunnels for the last several months, I think these figures prove that no army in the world ever had anything close to the rate that Israel managed to reach. At the same time, don't misunderstand me. We regret every loss of innocent life of every civilian, even more so of a child. Right. But as I've said, Hamas brought it upon themselves.
May I ask you your reaction to the decision by the United Kingdom government in the last 48 hours to drop its opposition to the prosecution of Mr. Netanyahu for war crimes in the International Criminal Court?
Very disappointing. And one thing we have to keep in mind, if you can do it to Israel, you can do it to any other democracy in the world defending itself from terror attacks. Just imagine the terrorists will try to do something right now in Paris during the Olympics, and the French government will react forcefully, as they should. And next thing they will know that there would be accusations in the ICC of, let's say, French defense minister, interior minister, of committing crimes against humanity or crimes against innocent population, or you name it. So I think that this is something to keep in mind. It's not just a political move. It's not about this or that constituency. It's a strategic mistake.
May I just ask one quick last question? We've seen the departure this week from the White House, or from the race for the White House, I should say, of what Mr. Netanyahu called the Irish-American Zionist, Joe Biden. What difference do you think a President Harris might make to the United States' stance towards Israel?
It's still too early to judge, but I think that President Biden was really a good friend and staunch supporter of Israel for many years. Good record being an American leader, a Democrat with his own obvious political views. He always knew that Israel was on the good side of history. And I sincerely hope that Vice President Harris, who basically, I use this expression, grew up politically, publicly with President Biden, sharing his approach, sharing his commitment, will continue the same line. We will always have some difference of opinions with our American friends. It has always happened. But having said that, I'm absolutely positive that the main line won't change.
Mr. Edelstein, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Back with our panel next.
My name is Oksana, and I'm Ukrainian Olympian for Ukraine 2008. I've been invited to speak about this big issue, big problem in my country, what's going on right now. And this number, 487, that's a huge number for me to even say. Yeah. But I was there on behalf of all of these athletes whose dream was killed by Russian army, and their names, sadly, in the dead list. But the name should be in the list of sports history of Ukraine. But the message for all of this, how I understand, just to stop the war and stop this number to be raised, because there's still 4,000 athletes at the front line fighting. So if we can do anything to make this war stop, that's going to be great. I think they will be happily proud that somebody is speaking about this problem. I'm sure they're dreaming about the day when the war will be over and they can continue competing and represent their country on the biggest world arenas. I have lots of friends because I studied in a boarding school, so so my sport is wrestling, but there wasn't only wrestling, there was shooting, athletics, boxing, gymnastics, and lots of different sports. So I know lots of athletes who already been killed and sadly passed away since the war started, but still I have lots of friends who are still there.
Life for young people at the moment is absolutely terrible because they should go to school between missile attack. They should compete between missile attack, and everything this can't. It has huge influence on their psychological health. When kids are growing from 3, 6, 7 years, always in the war, they have really a big problem with health.
Back with our panel, Lionel Barber, Camilla Cavendish and John Sopel. Lionel, the Israeli MP there, Yuli Edelstein, was pretty diplomatic about the possibility of Kamala Harris as president. Do you think it will make any difference?
Well, obviously it depends whether she wins, but she's taken a slightly tougher public stand, but we don't know what she said privately exactly to Benjamin Netanyahu in the meeting. Interestingly, with the meeting with Donald Trump, there were reports of some friction down there in Mar-a-Lago, but no confirmation. So I think there's actually quite a lot of unity in America right now in the political class. They want an end to the war in Gaza, a ceasefire, I should say, and the release of hostages. By the way, important to note that Hamas made a very significant concession 2 weeks ago. They've agreed that there's only a temporary ceasefire where the hostages would then be released, but not insisting on a permanent ceasefire. This is why what's happened this weekend is so damaging. It's not just the prospect or danger of a regional conflict, it's also that this could spill out into the talks, which are taking place this week. The head of the CIA, Bill Burns, is there trying to get that deal over, trying to get that deal on the hostages and a temporary ceasefire over the line.
John, you've spent a lot of time with all of the people who are around Harris and who might be in there and so on. Do you think that there's any prospect of a different change if she were to be elected?
I think there is a bit of a change. I think certainly, as Lionel says, in terms of tone, you're already seeing that. And that could start to play well in all sorts of areas where Biden was really suffering. I mean, young people on college campuses, Arab Americans, of whom there are a huge number in Michigan, which is a key swing state that, the Democrats need to take in November if they're to win. So I think tonally you're going to see a slight difference. I've also picking up that there's a sort of disenchantment with the national security establishment as it's currently configured in Biden's team, and that she wants to do things rather differently. Now, that might kind of signify more than just a shift in tone, but something a bit more substantial. Look, we don't know. I mean, the biggest task that Kamala Harris has got right now is to define herself before Donald Trump does the defining for her. She wants to be able to do that. The strange thing is that she's been in public life now for 3.5 years as the vice president.
We have no idea.
We still don't really know who the real Kamala Harris is.
Well, actually, let's go on to that. Let's just have a look at the picture right now, and I can summon it up here. This is the picture in the crucial swing states, all of which Biden won last time. We can see that Trump is, according to polling as of 4 days ago, just a bit ahead. I mean, significantly ahead in 5 of them. Camilla, what do you reckon?
Well, I think John's made a really important point, which is that most people have never noticed Kamala Harris yet. Yeah. So this poll is still being taken before people have really clocked who she is. And I think the Trump narrative at the moment, they're clearly taken aback. They didn't expect this to happen this quickly. The Trump narrative at the moment is that she's been hopeless for the last few years. Actually, the American electorate, most of them haven't heard of her. So she's got an absolute chance right now, as John says, to define herself. And the whole agenda, the whole childless cat lady allegation of J.D. Vance,
the vice presidential candidate on the Republican
vice
side.
Presidential candidate, is going really well. And the truth is, I think the Trump camp made a really hasty decision in picking Vance. I actually think the Democrats made a really hasty decision in picking Kamala, which may not work out very well. But at the moment, it means she does have the edge because she's got a couple of weeks to define herself. And Trump's rhetoric is really far too shrill and far too unpleasant, and he sounds rattled.
Well, it's fascinating. That map tells you everything you need to know. At the weekend, the Wall Street Journal poll showed that Kamala Harris had actually eradicated Trump's lead nationwide. But the key point are these swing states, mainly in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That's where it could come down to just 90 or so counties. Can she win those votes? Now, one, she's actually nailing down the Democratic base. But the question is, can she reach those swing voters, those undecided, those who are actually put off by Trump, and certainly J.D. Vance, who, by the way, at this rate, is looking as bad as Dan Quayle did about 1998.
Yeah, but I don't think, if I remember, wasn't Dan Quayle the vice presidential candidate who couldn't spell potato?
Yes, he put an E on the end.
Yeah, he did. I do it all the time, by the way.
But there is a serious... It's completely true that there seems to be some enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, but if you're a political operative, you're looking below the top numbers. And actually, if we look at this map again, we're seeing 7 states which, as I read it, and John, you will be the expert amongst us, have a particular characteristic that, by and large, maybe Arizona is an exception, or Arizona and Nevada. They are older, whiter, and more working class than
and Latino.
Your
Yes.
overall.
But the thing is that I think that Kamala Harris's entry into the race, you might be able to add to that map and say, well, maybe North Carolina comes into play, which Barack Obama took, and Trump only just held on to in 20. So you suddenly got a map that widens, because the strategy of Biden, if he was going to have stayed in the race, was purely those Midwest states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Now you've got Kamala Harris attracting Latino, black votes, and you suddenly think, well, Georgia might be in play, North Carolina could be in play, 20% of the population there, you know, Arizona, certainly. So instead of it just being the Rust Belt, she can go for the Sun Belt as well, as it's called.
But isn't the issue here that those people in a lot of those states, to some extent, I don't want to play the identity politics thing, but they identify with Biden. He's a union guy, he's been there for a long time, he's old, he's white. They won't respond, perhaps, to a California lawyer who happens to be black and a woman.
Maybe you're talking about men, because let's remember, a lot of these swing states, there's what they call suburban moms, who've been quite radicalised by the Republicans' approach to abortion, on which Kamala Harris has actually been really effective. So I wouldn't underestimate the potential effect that may have on women.
I think that everything is open now. Honestly, I think that, you know, a week ago, before Joe Biden announced he was stepping out of the race, I said it was over and Trump was heading for a kind of blowout victory a la Reagan in 1984.
The door is ajar.
Yeah.
It's not fully swung open. She has a chance to define herself. I mean, at the moment, she's going to be defined as a San Francisco Democrat, you know, soft on crime, useless on the border. You know, it is pretty striking the way the empty vessel, by the way, acknowledged within Democratic circles as well as Republican, is now a kind of super tanker. That will not last.
And the border is a major political problem in America. It was always going to be Biden's problem. Now it's her problem, and she hasn't got much to say on that.
Biden was a sure loser. Now, with Harris, they have a chance.
OK, major international issues to end this programme, and in fact this year, with Olympics, Paralympics for 4 weeks, 10 seconds each. What are you going to be watching?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, it's Nadal-Alcaraz. Tennis.
Tennis, OK.
Greco-Roman wrestling. Honestly, it's the sports that you've never, ever seen that you think, I've got to watch this, this is going to be fun.
It's got to be cycling and just pray nobody else gets a puncture.
There's such a John Sopel I've never seen before, actually. I will be watching synchronised swimming, which the idea of which is ridiculous, but the practice of which is strangely beautiful. Well, that is it for this week's show, and that's it for the summer. We're going to be in recess until September. Take some time to relax on that sofa while you're watching it. It's been a pleasure to be with you this Sunday and all the Sundays before. We'll be back with you in the autumn. Have a good summer.